26 days from today, followers of Jesus all over the world will gather together in some form or fashion, and they will look different from community to community, but they will gather together in some form or fashion, and they will celebrate what is known worldwide as Good Friday. And Good Friday centers around an object. Specifically, it centers around the object of the cross. And as a follower of Jesus, and as many followers of Jesus here in person and watching online, when we think about the cross, we think about sacrifice. We think about Jesus giving his life on the cross. And so we say, hey, 26 days from now, we will gather together and we will focus wholeheartedly on the cross. 28 days from today, the church will gather globally, all over, to celebrate, to think on, to remember, not a cross, but another object, a tomb. A tomb where there is no body except for some cloth that laid there because the person who was there no longer is there. It's empty. 26 days, a cross. 28 days, a tomb. But I will make the case that it's not the objects that are significant. It's not the objects that make those days something to put on the calendar. But it's the person who hung on them and laid in them. You see, there was a guy by the name of Paul. He was a church planter. And he was planting a church all over. In fact, Paul was an enemy of Jesus at one point. In fact, Paul wanted to do everything except for what Jesus would hope to do in the world. And Paul, actually, as a church planter, prior to being a church planter, was a church killer. He would go and arrest people that created the church, and he would drag them out of their homes, put them in prison. He would see or watch over their death sentences. He made sure they were persecuted to the nth degree. Everything that was allowed, that's what he did. If you were to look back throughout writings that we have from history, this is what you would find. Who was on the cross? Who was in the tomb? History says it was Jesus. Eyewitnesses say it was Jesus. There's a doctor by the name of Luke. He says it was Jesus. The enemies of Jesus, one guy, we're going to read his writing today, he says it was also Jesus. So the question is, who was Jesus? And this enemy that becomes friend, Paul, this church planter, from church persecutor and church killer to church planter, he goes and he plants some churches in various locations, and he's having some issues with a few of them. Particularly this one issue of when he plants something, there's this group of false teachers that will come in after he's left. So he might spend a few months there, or maybe sometimes up to a year and a half, even 3 years. And after he's gone, this group waits for Paul to be gone. And then they move in and they distort the message that Paul planted the church with, which is this simple message, that Jesus is all that matters. That everything in our world revolves around the idea of who Jesus is. His connection to the Father, what Jesus did on the cross, what Jesus did in the tomb, all of those things, it centers around Jesus. And then these other guys come in, they say, look, Jesus is great, but let's take him down a few notches. We need to take him down a few notches. He's special, but he's not this thing that Jesus has created. In fact, there's more to this whole thing. They introduce all kind of other thoughts that change the message of Jesus. And so Paul gets word of this distortion that's happening in these churches that he's planted, and he writes a number of letters. And basically what he's attempting to do for the church that he helped to mother, that he gave birth to, is say, hey, let me answer this really important question. Because it seems like you forgot who Jesus was. And these other folks, they've come in and they've given you another idea of what Jesus is. Let me answer the question. Who was Jesus? And so what I want to do this morning is I want to read you just a few thoughts that he gives. Typically we would put what I read onto the screen whether it's here in person or on the TV screens or iPads or wherever you're watching on at home. But this time, I don't want to put it up. I just want you to close your eyes unless you're driving. You keep your eyes open. But everybody else, I want you to close your eyes. And I want to read this to you. And I think it's so vivid. I want whatever experience you come from, even if you have no faith experience, I want you just to imagine, what must this guy be like to have this description attached to him? And so it's, like I said, it's pretty detailed things, and it's pretty short, so this will be quick. So everybody close your eyes. I'm going to read out of Paul's letter to his baby church in Colossae, Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, just a couple of verses. So close your eyes and I'll read, and you just imagine what I'm saying. He's the Son, or the Son is the image of the invisible God. He's the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven, things on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He's before all things, and in him all things hold together. He's the head of the body of the church. He's the beginning of the firstborn among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. You open your eyes. What did you see? I think at first glance, we can read that and say, oh, yeah, all that sounds great. If Jesus is who he says he is, that means he's pretty important. He's pretty significant. I got it. We got you. Can we move on? I think we need to spend a little more time. I think when we read it that way, and maybe you had some images pop into your head as I was reading it out loud, but I want to take just a moment because I think there's something, some depth that we have to kind of do some mining to really get to where what Paul is trying to say. And if not careful, we'll miss it. So in terms of theology, when we talk about studying God and who God is and what his relationship is with us, this is an enormous piece of that. When we're asking the question, do we really want to know, not just, hey, should we have hope? Yes, should we have hope? Is Jesus our hope? Yes, Jesus is our hope. Does Jesus say he can forgive our indiscretions, our sins, the wrongdoings, the mistakes we've made in our life? Yes, Jesus says he can do that. And like all of that is fine. But if we really want to dig into who is this Jesus, what is the meat behind the hope and the sin, all of those things, here it is. And just a few verses. It begins, did you catch it? In just 15, in the first little line, the tiniest section, it says this: the Son is the image of the invisible God. And when he says the Son, he's talking about Jesus. The Son is the image of the invisible God. In other words, what was invisible has now been made visible. Up until this time, the people of God and anyone else, they've been searching for, yearning for, hoping for, climbing mountains, crossing oceans, all those things, just putting themselves out there to find, where is God? Where is God, and how do I get connected to him? And this has been a nonstop search, not just for people who were part of the Jewish faith, but also the Christian, not Christian faith for sure, but every other faith on the planet. Everyone's searching for God. And so Paul, in this one little line, he says, the Son is the image of the invisible God. In other words, everything that everyone on the planet has been searching for all of human history, what was invisible through Jesus is now made visible. What was too far to be seen has now come close enough to touch. It's so difficult for us to comprehend, to wrap our mind around it, that he would show up as one of us. To summarize it, I would say it this way: Jesus leads us as God to God as one of us. Jesus leads us as God to God as one of us. He's saying, hey, here's the deal. This is how significant Jesus is. What we aspire to find in God, Jesus puts on display in himself. Yet he puts it on display in a way that what was invisible now can actually be seen. And so far beyond that, it's not just seen, but actually touched. What we've been chasing this entire time came to us instead of us trying to track it down. Yeah. You know, the relationship Jesus has with God, being the image of what's invisible, that's significant. But I'll be perfectly honest with you, Jesus wasn't going for or interested in significance. The next piece, as Paul's trying to build this case, Paul says in 15, on the back half, he says, he's the firstborn over all creation. For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And so not only is Jesus the image of the invisible God, not only is Jesus what makes what is too far to even see close enough to touch, where the God we've been searching for and chasing down actually shows up to us as God, but also as one of us. Not only is that the truth, he also says, and makes this enormous leap, that he's also the creator. Now, when I first hear that, I'm like, hold on one second. You can't trick me, Paul. You can't trick me, because I went to church as a little boy, and I remember, if I don't remember anything, I remember this one memory verse that they had me memorize. You know what I'm saying? Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created. I remember that. And now maybe it changed. Let's check. I mean, my Bible's right here. I can probably find the first verse, right? I got a little education, you know what I'm saying? I can find this first verse. Genesis 1, let's see. No, it still says that. In the beginning, God created. Now you're throwing me for a loop, Paul, because I got you. He's the image of the invisible God. I get it. He's made what was too far away to even see, close enough to touch. I ain't got to chase him because he came to me. But now you're saying that he's creator also? Now, how does that line up with Genesis 1:1, that in the beginning God created? As we begin to really unpack the entire story of God, we recognize that Genesis, being the first book in what we find as the Bible, that it's the first time God was able to disclose a little piece of himself to us. And what we find is the further and further along in the story we go, the more God reveals who he is. And so while at first glance, Genesis 1:1 makes what Paul says really difficult, it makes a little more sense when you realize that's just the first sentence we hear from God. And what will amount to be thousands and thousands of sentences to come. It makes perfect sense that he wouldn't give us the complete picture in sentence 1. And I'll go so far as to say that the longer we go from that sentence 1 forward, the more we learn about who God is and what God's about. And I think there's still more to learn. I think there's still more disclosure to come. I don't think we have a full picture of who Jesus and the Father are. And Jesus specifically said, I've gone to prepare a place for you. Now, in our mind, we have a thoughts of what that place could be, but there's still so much more for Jesus to unveil to us. We are simply in the next chapter of the story of the people of God. And I'm not sure when the final chapter is written, but I know that we're on track and we're heading in that direction. And the longer our relationship with God goes, the more we learn about who he truly is. And so when I see this, that Paul makes this statement, he said, hey, he's trying to write back to his baby church and say, hey, here's the deal. When I left you, I created this idea, this picture of what the church ought to be. And at the very center of it was Jesus. And these other folks have come in and said, well, Jesus is significant. He's important. We're going to just kind of take him out, take him a few notches down, and we're going to put something else in the center. Jesus isn't quite the center of it. And Paul's saying, hold on, let me just tell you who you're taking out of the center of what I've created, what I've planted with you. You're taking out the image of the invisible God, the thing that every person on the planet has ever chased down in their entire lifetime. He was here. In fact, we didn't have to chase him down. He came to us. That's who you're taking out of this. Just making that clear. And beyond that, the guy who created, right? The guy who created it all. You're taking him out of the center. Now, I'll tell you, when I think through what does it feel like to cast the cares and the concerns I have towards Jesus, with this understanding of who Jesus is, it gives me more comfort to think that Jesus played a role in creation. I mean, after all, Jesus was there for the nuts and bolts of who we are. He knows everything about us if he is creator. It'd be like asking Elon Musk to give us a tour of the first Tesla. Like, hey, tell us the ins and outs of it. And he would be able to tell you every single detail of how this works and where it came from and how they put it together and where this idea came from and how they're going to make it, kind of tweak on it and make it a new operating system and how they're going to add to it, all those things. Man, if he were to give you a personal tour of the very first one to roll off the assembly line, or it probably wasn't even an assembly line for the first one, this prototype that he put blood, sweat, and tears in, he'd be able to tell you about every nook and cranny and why it does this and what the warning light means, all those things. And Jesus is saying, hey, I was there when I put you together in your mother's womb. I was there putting all of your tiny little pieces together. I know you. So be careful, Paul says, taking the image of the invisible God, creator, out of the center of what you're doing. He's not finished yet, though. He still has more, because at the end of the day, Jesus' relationship with creation, it does make him more significant. But I'll be perfectly honest with you. I'm positive Jesus wasn't hoping for significance. He continues in Colossians 1:18. We just read the very next sentence. And Paul says, and he is the head of the body, the church. Such a simple phrase. He's the image of the invisible God. He's creator. He's the head of the body of the church. You see, the church is a result of something Jesus did. Jesus put it into motion. In fact, specifically, the church is the result of the work and life of Jesus. Jesus, as he's getting ready to be finished here on earth, he gathers his followers together on the side of a hill, and he says, hey, I want to tell you something. Specifically, I don't want to tell you something. I want to tell you something to do. I don't know if you thought we were going to get together and do a bunch of hugs and kisses and see you laters, or it's not really goodbyes, all those things we typically do. But no, Jesus says, actually, I ain't got time for any of that. I have a mission to send you on. Specifically, we call it a commission, and it's called the Great Commission. He says, here, I'll make it simple for you. From this moment on, I want you to go into all the world and make disciples. Baptize them and teach them to obey everything that I have taught you. And from that moment, the church is given birth to. And so Jesus specifically told them, this is the what. I want to tell you the what. This is what you must accomplish. But I'll leave the how up to you. And the how becomes the church. The church only exists to fulfill the mission of Jesus. That's it. And so I'll be perfectly honest with you. There are moments when Jesus likely looks at what we kind of do down here and we call it church. And he says, hey, hold on one second. If you're going to use the word church, that's the how to accomplish my mission that I gave each of you. By the way, Paul makes a really good argument. I'm in charge of that mission, not because I like the church or love what the church is, but I love the mission that it's on. And that's the how that people have chosen to deal with it. And so I'm in love with the church now, not because of the church, but because the people chose it for the how to to accomplish my mission. So when he looks at it, he sees folks that are doing things and it's just a Sunday morning, let's get together, drink some coffee, flash some lights, and feel better about our week. He's like, hey, that's not my mission. That's not why I created you. That's not why I sent you on a thing. Not to get together on Sundays. I didn't do that. In fact, he would probably prefer you take the church piece off of it. Hey, my people have already decided the church is the how to fulfill my mission. So stop calling what you're doing church. If you're just getting together on Sunday mornings and having fun. The church only exists to fulfill the mission of Jesus. No other reason. There's some benefits that come with it, but it's not the purpose behind it. And so Paul is saying, be careful, baby church, to take Jesus out of the center of what you're doing, because he's the image of the invisible God. He's created you. He is creator. And by the way, he's in charge of you. So he sets your mission. He sets your purpose. He gives you your objectives. It's by his expectations we can measure whether or not we are successful. So if you take him out of the middle of it, you got something, but it ain't the church. You got a different purpose and a sorry how. Jesus being the head of the church, specifically his relationship with the church, now that makes him significant. But I'm positive Jesus wasn't chasing significance. And so Paul continues to build his case. We go to 1 verse 18. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. The beginning and the firstborn from among the dead. Now this is something we are all familiar with. Death. I know what the sting of death feels like. I know what it's like to lose someone that you thought you'd never have to do life without. Where that thought just never crossed your mind, right? Like life is going on and it just never crossed your mind that there will be a chunk of time in your life where you would have to do life without them. I've been there. I'm there. You know those moments where sometimes you wake up and you forget that they're gone? And just for a brief moment, for whatever reason, and then it hits you, oh, no, she's gone. Oh, yeah. You know, I get if you're not connected to faith, if you're not a faith person, not a Jesus person, not a church person, I get why you might read this or listen and say, you know what, I'm not on board with this image of the invisible God. I don't believe in God, so can't have an image of something that's not real. So good try, Paul, but I'm still taking Jesus out of the center of that. Yeah. I even get the next piece where it's like, well, creator, I'm not on board with that either. I'm pretty sure we just kind of happened. Like we're the sum of what happens when ish happens. And then here we are. Ta-da. Like I get that too. So no need to keep Jesus in the center for that. We can put him over there. We don't need one of them creator people. Especially hardcore do I get that you don't need church. Like, hey, church, like I got drugged here, or my friend has duct taped me down on the sofa and made me watch this video if that's what you're doing. I'm sorry, unduct tape them, please. That's not nice. And you're watching this and you're like, I don't need church, so I certainly don't need Jesus there. But it's this fourth pillar that really intrigues me. Because I think we all feel the sting of death. Maybe the fear of death. And here Paul is trying to say that Jesus has this incredibly unique relationship with death. That he's the firstborn from among the dead. And suddenly I'm thinking, even if the rest aren't true, what if that could be? What if that could be? So you're saying that there's promise for something past death? And it's because of what was invisible has been made visible? That there's something past death, there's something after death that's good? That's equal to life? And that's doable because, and Jesus is aware of it because he created us. He knows how we work, which also means he understands how to reverse engineer death. Are you saying that there's hope from the misery that death continues to create and wreak in our world, whether it's from COVID or cancer or car wrecks? And that Jesus has chosen to be the head of the how called the church, that brings a very simple message, which is the mission of Jesus, that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever would believe in him would not perish, but have everlasting life. And that's the mission of the church. This whole time, I thought it was give me your money and let's do coffee things on Sundays. But Paul is saying, be careful, baby church. Don't take out of the center Jesus. And what's more important than any of this, as it applies to each of us today, is likely the phrase we've been using all morning. Because if everything I just said is true, even if it's just remotely true, especially number 4, the fourth pillar, that he's the firstborn from among the dead, because 28 days from now, followers of Jesus all over the world are going to get together and they're going to celebrate that Jesus is the firstborn from among the dead. Because the reason the tomb was empty wasn't because someone stole his body. The reason the tomb was empty wasn't because they put his body behind another rock, behind the rock, and nobody could find it. The reason the tomb was empty was because he was the firstborn from among the dead. In other words, he got up from his deathbed after already laying in it and making a small little home for a couple of days and said, thanks, I appreciate the time I spent with you, but I've got other things, greater things. And by the way, you're going to have a bunch of the people that I deeply care about, and you're going to hold them for a second, but I'm coming back for all of them, and I'm going to take every one of them from you. And then he walks out. He walks out. Oh, Jesus. We've been asking the wrong question, haven't we? Because if that's true, it's not who was Jesus, but it's who is Jesus. Because he ain't dead. And here's the truth, though. While Jesus' relationship with death makes him incredibly significant, I am absolutely positive Jesus is not chasing significance. And here we have it. I don't know if you caught it the first time. I don't know if you can even visualize this one simple, solitary word. I don't know what it looks like. But hopefully I'm going to give you a face for it in about 10 seconds. It's the summation of everything we've talked about this morning. You ready? Here it comes. So that, everything before this, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Now you're looking at it like, supremacy is a nice word. No. Supremacy is not a nice word. Supremacy is the only word. In fact, this particular word here, supremacy, is only used once in the entirety of the Bible. And the reason for that is because if you apply this adjective to anything else, it devalues it when it's used for Jesus. Yeah, Jesus is significant, but there's a lot of people that are significant. There are a lot of people in a church that are significant. There are a lot of people in terms of creation, the way the world put together, that are significant. There are a lot of people that would have the title significant. But Paul is saying, you're not taking someone significant from the center of what you're doing. You're taking someone who has supremacy from the center of what you're doing. And by the way, there's only one guy on the planet that has supremacy. And he builds it in 4 pillars, that he's the image of the invisible God. He's made what was so far away, could not be seen, close enough for you to actually touch. You didn't have to chase him. He came to you. That he is creator. That he knit you together, put you together, knows you inside and out. He's the head of the church because he gives us our mission and makes sure that we follow through on it. And he's the firstborn among the dead. And when you take those 4 incredibly significant pillars and you put them together, you get supremacy. And nobody else can touch it. Paul's telling his baby church, be careful. Be careful taking Jesus and trying to knock him down a few notches. Be careful from trying to take him off the podium that I left him on when I left you as a church. Be careful not to keep him in the place that he ought to be. If you move him a millimeter, it's too far. In fact, your job is to figure out how to elevate him higher than I left him. Not bring him down to where he's more tangible. Paul's making this case. He's making this case, but at the end of the day, it's what God already knew. And I love this part. It's a summation, not just Paul gives his summation. All these things, those 4 things happen, and the result of that is so that he might have supremacy. And then we have this concluding thought that just comes from the very voice of God. And Paul, speaking on God's behalf, he's saying, look, and this is the way God kind of worked this out. When these 4 things were put in place, when these 4 pillars were firmly planted into who we are as people, this was the summation. 19 and 20. For God was pleased. He was encouraged. He was enthusiastic. His heart was full to have the fullness dwell in him. And through him to reconcile himself to all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. It's a summary statement that basically, let me just walk you through it. He says that God, when he saw exactly who Jesus could become and exactly who Jesus had to be for all of us, he was pleased to allow the fullness of himself dwell in Jesus. And he says, this is why. This 100%, without a doubt, this is why. Because in Genesis 1:1, the truth is God created. And just a few verses later, his creation stepped in it. And from that very moment, God became distant. And there started the human history of trying to find what was visible, but now became invisible because of what they stepped in. And so they started to search all over for what they were born and wired to do, which was to be connected to the Father. But they stepped in it, and so they were separated. And so Jesus shows up and he says, I am the image of the invisible God. What we have done in our past and the way we got separated was choices that we made, but now we have made a choice to come back to you. That when he looked at creation, that Jesus put each and every one of us together, and he created us to be a part of one another. He created us for community, but not just community with us, community with the Father, community with the Holy Spirit, community with Jesus. And so Jesus shows up and says, hey, I created you. I know how you were built, and so I'm going to give you the mission because I know how you'll respond to it. I know that you'll give birth to the how, the church, and I'm going to lead that thing to accomplish this mission and as many people as possible. And Jesus shows up and he says, I know death stings, but I've come to give it a pretty good tail whipping. And though it'll sting temporarily, you're mine in the end. And so those four pieces are simply putting back together what was broken when we made mistakes. So Paul again is pleading, don't move Jesus. Keep him at the center of what you do. Don't move Jesus. God says that I'm pleased to have my fullness dwell in him, and I will reconcile myself through him to all things. He goes so far as to say by making peace through his blood shed on the cross that we'll remember 26 days from now. Good Friday. And so my question to wrap up this morning is kind of twofold. I first want to talk to those of you who are watching and in the room that are followers of Jesus already. And I want to ask you a very serious question, and I think I would ask that you would take it very seriously and you would actually answer this question. Not out loud. If Jesus is real to you on those four things, that you believe he's the image of the invisible God, that you believe he's creator, that you believe he's the head of the church, that you believe he's the firstborn from among the dead, that makes him more than just significant. That gives him supremacy. And if that's the case, do the people in your life who are disconnected from faith know you feel that way? Or are you hiding a secret from them that you know his relationship with death, and you're more nervous to bring it up to them than you are for them to never know? Now, to help you with this, we ask the question every Easter season: is there anything else we could do as a church to give people an opportunity who are far from God to say yes, that would not even say yes to a Sunday morning? And so to do that, we create a gathering for Good Friday. Obviously with COVID, there's some limitations to what we're able to pull off. But let me tell you, we like to be practical, so let me just jump into it. On Friday night, April 2nd, 26 days from today, we've rented the Wadsworth Auditorium in downtown Newnan. It seats a little over 600 folks or so. We're limiting it to make sure everyone can social distance and those things to 200 people. We're billing it in the community as a date night or friends night out. So there's no child care. You kind of get child care at home. Dinner's included. Dinner starts getting served at 6 o'clock. It'll be outside, be a little outside type thing, working on food trucks, those type things for dinner. So dinner goes at 7:30. We've got a gathering just for 200 folks. And we want the 200 to be folks that are part of Foundation that bring people who are disconnected from faith. People that would not come with you on a Sunday morning. Like, no, I don't care if your church is out of high school. I'm still not going. I ain't going to do it. But they would go to a community event on a Friday night at a place not associated with a church. And all we're going to do that night is what every other follower of Jesus on the planet does, and remember the cross. And every single moment, an ounce, an inch, everything that evening is designed for people far from God. Everything. There's a cost to it. It's $10. That covers your meal and all those things. It's limited to the first 200 that sign up. And again, no kiddos. We just want it to be some adult stuff happening. And it's the first 200 that register. You can register on the Church Center app or at religionisheavy.com. I say religion is heavy. Maybe you've seen what's happening in the square. We've got cinder blocks all over the square that's painted in our green that says religion is heavy on it. Some of those have gone well, and then we've had a bunch of complaints at one particular place where they were not happy about it, which told me we were doing exactly the right thing. That's it. I want you to ask questions. I want you to figure out why our church thinks religion is heavy. And I think I'm going to make the case Jesus also thinks that. But it might not go over well with everybody. So that's Friday night. So if you're a follower of Jesus, that's the question I'm asking you. Are the people disconnected from faith in your life? Are you actively involved in introducing them to the guy who holds those 4 pillars of significance, which ultimately gives him supremacy? And if not, it's time to engage. You've got 26 days. 26 days to take a look and say, hey, circle this night on your calendar. I know you won't go to church with me, but go with me on this Friday night. For those of you who are watching or sitting here in the room and you're not a follower of Jesus, I'll tell you this. My goal for you 28 days from now is for you to have made a decision one way or the other. And these are your 2 answers. I want to give my entire life to Jesus, or I've got some questions that must be answered before I can make that step, and nothing in between. And you know what those questions are. Because I fear that the place we get most lost is in the middle, where we can't figure out a way to say, look, there's questions I got to have answered. And if I can answer these questions, I might feel decent about doing that. But these questions are too big for me. I've got to have some of these questions answered. Or, no, I've got my questions answered. I want to give my entire life to Jesus. But it's this middle place of I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm not really sure, and I don't really want to take the time. I think that it's important enough that either Jesus is exactly who Paul makes the case for, and you should at least figure out, do I believe him or do I think he's nuts? Is he a Lord or is he a liar? One of the two must be true. My hope for you, over the next 3 weeks as we lead up to that, we're going to ask the question every single week, who is Jesus? And these 4 things we've talked about is just a foundational principle. He's so much more than that. And so my hope 3 weeks from now is you have an answer. To me, I know who Jesus is. If you're someone here and you want to begin a conversation, maybe you've got some big questions. We try to make it as easy as possible to begin the conversation. And we know most folks like to begin a conversation through text message. And so we just make it easy. You can text right now, baptism, to 678-661-6330. And that will begin the text. It doesn't commit you to anything. It just says, hey, I'm interested in I have questions about what does it mean to give my entire life to Jesus. Or maybe you have other questions that deal with Jesus, and you can use that as an entry way to say, hey, I want to just begin the conversation. I want to have an answer to whether I think he's real, legit, or not legit 26, 28 days from now. That's it. Over and over again, I have to take a look at my own life as I learn more and more about who Jesus is and more about what he wants from me. My life constantly has to change and evolve into matching up what he puts in my heart. So I know who Jesus is. But even still, he continues to show me a bit more each and every day. It's the greatest decision I've ever made in my entire life. And I want that for every single person on the planet. And I think if you asked every follower of Jesus in this room, they would say the same thing. Because we believe that Jesus is the image of the invisible God. We believe that Jesus is the creator. We believe that Jesus is the head of the body of the church. And we believe that Jesus is the firstborn from among the dead. And while that makes him incredibly significant, significance was not what he was chasing. It's supremacy. There's no one like him. Not even close.